Still in shock, Sanya found herself grappling with a mixture of confusion and disbelief as she tried to understand why Gi-yoon was unaffected by Yeo's powers of affection. It was baffling to her that someone as potent as Yeo, whose very presence commanded love and devotion, could fail to sway Gi-yoon. Instead, she was astonished by the cold hostility he displayed towards her. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, the sound of hurried footsteps broke through her contemplation. Two men, Garam and Mirini, rushed towards the door, their faces etched with concern. Their arrival was a blur of motion as they burst into the room, their eyes immediately locking onto Sanya, who was standing alongside Yeo. Their expressions shifted from relief to surprise as they noticed who else was in the room, Gi-yoon. The tension was palpable, and the air seemed to thicken with unspoken questions and simmering emotions. Gi-yoon's presence was enough to make both men flinch, their instincts warning them of the danger he represented. Without hesitation, Yeo tightened her hold on Sanya, drawing her closer, as if to shield her from the invisible threat that Gi-yoon posed. Gi-yoon, sensing the rising tension, offered a curt apology. His voice was devoid of genuine remorse, more of a formality than a heartfelt expression. He assured them that he would leave now, but made it clear that he intended to return, his words carrying an unsettling promise. Garam, his eyes narrowing with anger, took a step forward, but before he could act, Mirini placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. The silent exchange between the two men spoke volumes. Now was not the time to escalate the situation. Yeo, ever composed despite the danger, knelt before Sanya, her eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Sanya, though unharmed physically, felt a cold dread settling deep within her. The events of the past few moments had shaken her, leaving her feeling vulnerable and exposed. As Yeo gently caressed Sonya's cheeks, Sanya couldn't help but marvel at the dichotomy before her. Yeo, the most powerful person in the empire, had rushed in to protect her with no regard for her own safety. It struck Sanya as both admirable and tragic that someone of Yeo's stature could be insulted so brazenly by someone beneath her. For a brief moment, Sanya wondered if Yeo lived her life enveloped in love and protection from others, all the while being so deeply vulnerable to the cruelty of those around her. The conversation shifted when Yeo asked a question that caught Sanya off guard. "Do you perhaps miss your father?" Yeo's voice was gentle, yet the question carried a weight that made Sonya's heart skip a beat. Shocked, Sanya could only stare at Yeo as she continued, "I've heard you were very attached to Gi-yoon when you were in the Yuran clan." Before Yeo could continue, Sanya interrupted, the words tumbling out of her mouth as if they had been held back for too long. "I wasn't treated well in the clan, and I know it was because of my father's neglect." Her voice wavered, but there was a firm resolve behind her words. Garam and Mirini listened intently, their concern deepening as Sanya spoke. The truth was, Sanya had never known what a father's love felt like. In her past life, her mother had been her only family, raising her single-handedly until her untimely death. The orphanage where she had spent the remainder of her childhood had offered little comfort. Sanya had never yearned for a father, such a figure had always been absent from her life. In a brief moment of introspection, she wondered what difference it would make now to suddenly have a father in her life. The thought felt absurd to her. She missed ramen more than she missed having a father. Turning back to Yeo, Mirini, and Garam, Sanya said with a newfound clarity, "It would have been much better if such a man had never existed in my life. He is not my father." Her declaration left the room in stunned silence. Yeo, who had been quietly observing, watched as Sonya's eyes filled with tears. It was the first time anyone had seen her cry, and the sight left Mirini and Garam momentarily speechless. Even Yeo, who had witnessed countless emotions in her lifetime, was shaken by the sight of Sonya's tears. Moved by a sudden impulse, Garam stepped forward and offered, "If you need a father, I can be one for you." His voice was filled with sincerity, but Sanya only looked at him briefly before turning her gaze away, rejecting his offer without words. Undeterred, Mirani joined in, reminding Garam that he was already married to Yewa, to which Garam responded, somewhat cheekily, that he was married to her as well. Mirani smiled and addressed Sanya, since you're Yewa's daughter and I'm her husband, doesn't that make me a suitable father for you? His tone was light, attempting to lift Sonya's spirits, but Sanya responded with a quiet, but pointed remark, if I thought about it that way, I'd have dozens, maybe even more than 24 fathers already. Her words left Mirani feeling a little disheartened, but the truth in them was undeniable. In a soothing gesture, Yewa lifted Sanya into her arms, cradling her as she whispered, it's okay not to have a father, Sanya. You already have a mother, and that's enough. It doesn't matter if you have hundreds, or even thousands of fathers, because I'm the only mother you'll ever need. Sanya felt a mix of emotions, awkwardness, comfort, and a small but growing sense of security. For now, she decided, this was okay. Garam, however, still clinging to the idea of being her father, suggested that she could at least call him by his name, but Mirani gently reminded him not to push the matter. Meanwhile, Giyun made his way out of the palace, a sense of satisfaction mingling with the fatigue he felt from the effort it took to breach the imperial palace without using the front gates. The energy he had expended had been significant, but in his mind, the gains far outweighed the losses. The barrier around the palace had truly weakened, where once it would have been impossible to even scratch it, now it barely offered any resistance. This realization brought a smirk to Giyun's face, as he thought about the absence of a certain individual that had clearly made a difference. He paid no further mind to the weakened barrier, focusing instead on the strange feelings that had stirred within him that day. The Empress Regnant had appeared different to him before. The thought of laying a hand on her would have been inconceivable. Yet, on that day, he had felt a dangerous sense of power over her, as though he could crush her like an insect beneath his foot. It was an intoxicating thought, one that lingered as he reflected on his encounter with Sanya. Although Sanya had acted as she usually did, rushing up to him with the eagerness of a loyal dog greeting its master, something had been different about her. There was a subtle change in her demeanor, a subdued quality that hadn't been there before. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if Sanya was harboring resentment towards him for his neglect. But just as quickly, he dismissed the thought, confident that as long as Sanya continued to act favorably toward him and never wavered in her loyalty, she would be of no threat. If she ever did have a change of heart, he knew he could end her life without hesitation. With the barrier now weak, Giyun Yuran decided it was time to put his plans into action. A day before Arian Day, when Sanya should have been rolling around in bed, enjoying a well-deserved nap, her thoughts were anything but restful. Restlessness gnawed at her, and instead of succumbing to the law of sleep, she found herself dressing and making her way to the Flower Light Palace. The decision was sudden, and even she was surprised by the impulse. The Flower Light Palace, known for its tranquility and the beautiful gardens that surrounded it, seemed like the perfect place to calm her nerves. But Sanya had another reason for her visit, one that weighed heavily on her mind. Upon her arrival, she was greeted warmly by the palace staff, who seemed eager to please. The cook, having heard of her impending visit, had taken it upon himself to prepare an array of delicate snacks. He saw it as an opportunity to showcase his culinary skills to someone of Sonya's stature. As she was led through the beautifully adorned corridors, she couldn't help but admire the serene atmosphere that enveloped the palace. It was a stark contrast to the more bustling parts of the imperial grounds. However, her attention was quickly diverted when she was informed that the flower consort, Choun, had been surprised to receive notice of her visit. Sonya's reputation for seldom leaving her own palace preceded her, and the sudden appearance in Churn's domain was enough to raise eyebrows. It was almost as if she were tethered to her palace, rarely venturing beyond its borders. The flower consort, graceful and composed as ever, wondered aloud what had brought Sanya to her palace on such short notice. Sanya knew that earning Chern's trust wouldn't be easy. She cleared her throat before explaining the reason for her sudden visit. Trying to act cute, she told Choun that she simply wanted to see her, which was why she decided to visit unexpectedly. However, Choun advised her not to say things she didn't mean, and Sanya felt annoyed that her attempt had failed. She then decided to tell Choun the real reason for her visit. She wanted to ask why there were no imperial guards in the palace. Choun questioned her and then explained that there was no need for imperial guards, or any such force around the palace. The barrier surrounding the palace seals the powers of those who are not part of the imperial family. Choun added that someone had been absent even before Sanya entered the palace. The prince consort of the Sopian clan had managed the barrier for generations, and it was what sealed other people's powers. Sanya mentioned that she had seen other consorts, and even some servants using their powers freely. Choun explained that those with strong powers could shed the effects of the seal quickly since no one was currently maintaining the barrier. She added that she wasn't sure how long the barrier would remain intact before the prince consort returned. Even without the prince, they could not allow the security of the palace to become lax. They inspect every guest and servant who enters the palace to ensure their powers are sealed and have increased surveillance around the palace to avoid any accidents. The prince consort will be back soon, so all we need to do is maintain the barrier until he returns, Choun said to Sanya. She added that while the barrier might not be as effective as before, it was still functioning. Sanya then realized that those with strong powers would be able to break free from the seal quickly if they wanted to. Everyone in the palace, from the consorts to the servants, had powers. Although Sanya had the shadows with her, she still felt scared. Noticing Sanya looking worried and sad, Choun asked if she was all right. Sanya replied that she was fine and that Choun shouldn't worry about her. Choun then asked how strong Sanya thought Mirani and Garam were. She explained that if the two of them joined forces, they could defend the entire capital against any danger. Sanya was shocked and admitted that she hadn't realized this since both of them usually acted silly and easygoing. In contrast, she had no powers, which made her feel scared. Choun reached for Sonya's hands and told her not to be afraid. She reassured her that nobody would be able to threaten her again. Choun acknowledged that Sanya had likely suffered more than most inside the imperial palace, but reminded her that she was now a princess, and the next in line to inherit the empire. If a situation arose that she could not handle, Choun advised her to reach out for help and not keep it to herself. She promised Sanya that she would always be there to support her. Sanya then realized that she had stopped shivering from fear. Smiling, Sanya thanked Choun for being so thoughtful, which made Choun blush. Blushing, Choun told Sanya that if she ever spoke about their conversation that day, she would retaliate, which made Sanya giggle. Sanya felt happy to have Choun by her side, even more than she had hoped for.